All right, we are live. We are local at a very odd time than usual. I am here with Luke Savage, famously known from Jacobin Magazine. His new book, The Dead Center, which I'm holding up, uh, Reflections on Liberalism and Democracy After the End of History. Make sure I got that right. Is in bookstores now. You can find it at OR Books and where else?
Wherever fine books are sold, I guess.
Yeah,
Find it in most places where they sell books.
yeah, I mean, unfortunately, if you have to go, I mean, I would advise not to go to Jeff Bezos' corporate machine, as I call it, to get this book, like I did, unfortunately. But if you're subject to default, I mean, you have to find your way to get it right.
My
So,
publisher at this juncture, my publisher would probably prefer it if I said that you can get it directly from their website,
mm,
orbooks.com. So that's probably the best place to get it. But I know that a lot of listeners to your show, viewers to your show, will probably know about Red Emma's, and I think they have it there too.
yeah, yeah. So at the end of the show, in the post production process, I'll put everything down in the YouTube as we are both streaming on that platform and Twitch simultaneously. So if you're watching on YouTube, everything will be down in the description, post game or post edit, post show, I guess you could say, uh, to basically just go find where books are sold. So anyway, Luke, also just like I said, you work at Jacobin Magazine. How long have you written for them precisely?
Well, I think my first article for them was back in 2014, but I've been working there as a staff writer for almost exactly 4 years. I started there, in that capacity, November of 2018, actually the week of the midterms back in 2018. So I guess I've been there for one full election cycle.
Wow. Um, and you also write for, I think, current affairs as well. You write pretty much for every publication here and there for the last, I don't know, couple years.
Not quite every publication, but yeah, certainly a lot of different ones.
I mean, as a fan of your work, more recently, I mean, I've seen your stuff obviously in Jacobin, but there's also current affairs. There's also your infamous take on, which I wasn't really going to try to get to talk about this much because you've written it already. You've written about it already, but obviously your critical take of Aaron Sorkin and The West Wing, which I agree with you, man. As someone who had to watch that show in high school history class, and just as I got older, it's like that is just nothing that left politics, whatever Aaron Sorkin's version of it is, it's just not correct. And you know, I mean, again, it's in the book, it's in the dead center, and it's also current affairs. Just it's like having to go and reread that specific article just to be like, yeah, this is on point. Like truthfully.
I
So
think that's a lot of people's favorite essays in the book. It's certainly one of my favorite things. I also watched a lot of the show growing up. I watched it for pleasure, not because anybody made me watch it. So I suppose in
mm,
writing a takedown of it, there was a bit of the fervor of apostasy.
mm. And like a lot of, I guess you could say Hollywood liberals. I mean, I like there's not really a better term that you can use for them, but a lot of like probably moderate liberals in general probably read that and was like, yeah, this is he's making fun of us essentially through his writing more or less, and it's just like, no, he's not. No, you're not, Luke. You're doing a fairly uh, reasonable critique of the show, and it's again horrendous take on liberal politics and also or left politics, I should say, and its own view, which is its own its own sort of Sorkinist worldview that Aaron Sorkin himself just for whatever reason doesn't seem to uh, I guess you could say know well enough because I mean I've seen the show, I've watched the show myself in years past, and like aside, I will admit from Richard Schiff, who does play Toby Ziegler, that did come out, I think, in 2016 and say he was for Bernie Sanders. Other than that, like there is no like anybody actually tweeting or anything from the cast like supporting anything that Bernie says or does, or even in progressive left politics in general. It's just same old moderate liberalism at its finest. And
Well, not only
that's
that,
why
but back in
Aaron's working.
2016, actually, Rob Lowe, who plays Sam Seaborn on the show, he was freaking out about Bernie Sanders' tax plan on Twitter, and he actually tweeted out a clip
Yeah,
of his own character in the show talking about how like we shouldn't call rich people names because they already pay most of the taxes or something like that. Rob Lowe, a guy who left the show, I think after
because of
season
a
four,
salary
because
dispute.
yeah,
Yeah,
he thought that getting $75,000 an episode
wasn't
wasn't
enough for
enough.
his.
So my tax plan is to incidentally is to tax Rob Lowe.
Yeah, same. I mean, when it comes down to it, elitist Hollywood actors are like Rob Lowe. They've got no say in what any progressive candidate on the left that's been consistent with everything in his life as Bernie has been. He's got no right to tell the modern voter, if you could say that, uh, who to vote for and what their plan is. I mean, the guy is nothing more than an elitist corporate shill, and that's all he wrote, really. All right, so I guess that I'll just jump in, and if I look down, it's because I actually pre-wrote some questions for the interview, so just ahead of time to stay focused. So I guess I in reading the book, in the first chapter, or at least in the first essay of the book, you talked about this like uh, back in 2008 when Obama's first campaign started, and how like when after he won that election, how we were all as a country, really as a country, both in the U.S. and in Canada, how we were all kind of hopeful about his candidacy, about what would become. And it's kind of weird to look back, some I guess however long it's been, like a decade, probably 10 plus years since that, of how he really turned out to be. And I guess I would kind of ask the first question: how would you describe your interest in like left politics in both the U.S. and Canada?
Well, I mean, in the book, the essay I think you're alluding to is kind of the most autobiographical one. And the book is not mainly a political autobiography, but I think there's no getting around the fact that certain experiences, living through certain moments can, really deeply inflect the way that you see the world and can, uh, make you skeptical about certain things and can also, attract you to alternatives to them. And, the Obama moment, I'm not going to say that that's where my uh, current politics started, but it's certainly a good moment to begin that conversation because I think, like a lot of people of kind of our generation, I was. An undergraduate. I just arrived in university when the Obama election happened. I suppose I might be a bit older than you, but I
Yeah, I was
was
born in '92, so yeah, we're
92.
probably both millennials in that
We're
way.
both millennials, both the same generation. But I think the Obama moment. Obama assembled a kind of historic coalition of voters, but more importantly, I mean, there was a kind of excitement about him that I think is pretty much unparalleled in modern history. He visited Germany, for example, right? I mean, during the election, and there was something like 100,000 people to hear him speak. And that moment on election night in 2008 felt like, uh, I mean, at the time anyway, it felt like a sort of something fundamental had really been transcended, and that there was some kind of new political era that was going to be inaugurated. And so I think, particularly, but not exclusively, but particularly if you were a young person at that time, and you were kind of expecting some kind of fundamental transformation to occur after 2008. to live through kind of the years that followed that, and to see the the sclerosis, the paralysis of that administration, and to see it really, suffer catastrophic electoral losses very quickly. I mean, within 2 years of being elected, but also really to see the way that it actually behaved, even when it had, this resounding Democratic mandate, from the election. At one point, 60 votes, a filibuster-proof majority in the United States Senate. See the way it actually behaved, even when it had that kind of power and that kind of mandate, particularly with regard to the financial crisis. I mean, there was just no attempt to fundamentally reorder, the American economy, or tackle the root causes of the financial crisis. And so I think, for a time anyway, a lot of people, I mean, I'm generalizing, a fair amount here, but
Mm.
it's a fair generalization. I think for a time, a lot of people of our generation perhaps thought that, Obama had tried to undertake a kind of political transformation, and he'd failed or something.
Yeah.
He'd faced too much Republican obstruction, that kind of thing. Or perhaps even, the country just wasn't ready for his, transformative politics. But at a certain point, I think many people came to the conclusion, that that really wasn't what was, that really wasn't what explained the disappointments of Obama. It was something much more fundamental. It was the fact that, beneath all of the kind of soaring rhetoric and, the kind of transcendent way that he often spoke, he really has a kind of small c conservative view of the world. He's someone who's very skeptical about, um, transformative politics. He's quite managerial in the way that he thinks about things. And it's not an accident that he, thinking in that way, became really the most, the kind of the definitive liberal politician of the 21st century so far, because that outlook is very much, it very much mirrors, I think, the outlook that I'm trying to criticize in the book. That's very, I think, broadly speaking, is the outlook a lot of liberals have today, which is, this kind of pairing of, on the one hand, a sort of rhetoric of progress, the sort of language of social justice and inclusion, but then all of it sort of paired with what is in practice a very conservative kind of politics. So I realized what you asked me was, where my own politics actually began. I didn't really answer your question, but you can feel free to ask me a follow-up if you want.
Well, I kind of actually agree with what you just said in that sense of the Obama presidency. Like, again, I was remember I was a sophomore in high school when during the election, and was actually asked my aunt at the time, when the day he was inaugurated in 2009, to stay home and watch the whole I guess you'd call celebration, as we would think, and really hopeful as a high schooler, like, hey, things are going to be different now after 8 long years of war and destruction. And the way the eyes of the world of America was treated, especially overseas in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, and now even in today's climate, Syria. It's like I had hope, and I think a year, maybe not even a year, but like a few months into the Obama presidency, probably maybe 5 or 6 months, I gave him that long, and then realized that he like you said, he's not really the transformational figure that we hoped he would be. But I was still, in my mind, like, still willing to give him some sort of benefit of the doubt, because again, it is true that he had a lot of conservative opposition from day one. But also, on the other side of the coin, you could say that Obama, I mean, he compromised too much with the Republican Party in his, at least in his first term. But and of course, that's what did him in the election of 2010, where Republicans took back I think it was the House, and the rise of the Tea Party movement, and then again in 2012 with Mitt Romney and the Tea Party influence in that election, and Obama getting reelected. And it really wasn't until probably Bernie Sanders' first campaign that it really dawned on me that Obama was a disappointment from 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 what I'd been learning about Bernie and seeing what he was doing on the campaign, by criticizing not just the Republicans, but also the Democrats, at least the I would say corporate elitist side of the Democratic Party that is Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Adam Schiff and all those folks. It now I'm kind of at this point where I'm like, yeah, Obama definitely, even now in his post presidency, like I don't really see him ever coming back to that progressive side that he at least showed himself in really the first two years before he ran for president. Because I was actually watching a video from David Dole, I think 2 days ago, where it's from 2006, where Obama was seated with Bernie at a campaign rally and basically just being this really, for lack of a better term, progressive.
Yeah.
And it was just like, man, what could have been, and you just have that sort of feeling of what could have been and what should have been versus what we now have.
Well, I know the footage you're talking about, and it is an incredible document. I mean, Obama 2008, I mean, superficially anyway, he was saying a lot of the kinds of things, his narrative of, the American political situation was, had some similarities, at least rhetorically, to the kinds of things Bernie, said in 2016 and again in 2020. I mean, really, one of the reasons Obama was so attractive to people is because he talked about creating a popular movement that was going to overcome all of the things about DC politics and about the Bush era that people didn't like. It was going to overcome the special interests who, were kind of represented by, his opponent in the primaries, Hillary Clinton. I mean, he wasn't wrong about that. But I think if I had been more perceptive at the time and I had read more carefully the things Obama was saying in books like The Audacity of Hope, I mean, there's a sense in which he's actually pretty honest if you read carefully. I don't think he ever well, I mean, it's a difficult question. I certainly think he publicly presented himself as a transformative figure, but when he communicated his actual political outlook in detail, I think it was evident that there was a lot about that outlook that was pretty conservative. I mean, if you think about the DNC speech that kind of launched him as a national figure, the 2004 DNC speech, where he said there's no red and no red America,
no red or blue
America, right? I mean, that's very much the theme of that speech. Obama is a tremendous public speaker, of course, and he's got a great gift for political storytelling. But if you actually kind of peel away the artifice in that speech, I mean, it's really just a very kind of centrist idea about overcoming partisan differences. And so when Obama talked about transcendence, I think that's kind of really what he was talking about. It was it was an Aaron Sorkin kind of transcendence more than a Bernie Sanders kind.
Yeah, I mean, he was really swept into that, as we were talking about in the beginning, that Aaron Sorkinite universe, which we will actually hold off to the very end because I did want to divulge further into that topic of Sorkin, like that is what they call the Sorkinism universe and left politics. Like, I don't know what it is. I am appalled by by the fact that people look at the West Wing and think that that's what left politics should be, and it's the complete opposite. But again, we'll save that for the end. I guess I also want to kind of talk about like you and like again how you came up in not just in the political world but also in the journalism world, especially in political journalism. As I say, you're well known in the Jacobin space. You've written for again current affairs. So I guess the next question I'd like to ask is like that very first article that you wrote, like for pretty much anyone. in like, even if it was like a school, like newspaper of some sort, you know what I mean? Because
Right.
I came up that as well with, school newspaper in high school. It's just like that was my love, and that's kind of what brought me into the world of journalism and broadcasting, so to speak. So, like, the first political article or even journalism article that you wrote, like, what was that like for you personally? And was that something that, like, you're thinking, maybe I could, if I'm good enough, I can make a living at this, so this kind of thing?
Well, I never thought I could make a living out of it. I mean, I do now make a living out of it, and no one's more surprised by that than me. I mean, the first thing I ever wrote, I would be embarrassed to read it now. It probably would have been for my elementary school newspaper, which I founded, with some friends. I mean, I guess probably the first real thing I ever wrote that was published anywhere would have been, I was at U of T for 5 years. I did my BA and my MA there, and I was involved with the Varsity, which is the student paper at U of T. It's the oldest student newspaper in Canada. And I guess in the fall of 2009, I think it would have been January of 2009, I wrote an article that I think was called Goodbye Neocons and Good Riddance or something like that. And I was kind of dancing on the grave of the Bush administration. I remember there was a picture of Dick Cheney or something that ran with it. And I remember being very excited that it was on the stands. And I remember, leaving my residence. I lived on campus at the time to go and pick it up. And I liked. I had political opinions. I liked writing them up, and so I started doing that when I was in, I would have been 19 at the time or something like that. And yeah, I've just been kind of doing it since.
Did you have any kind of editorial interference in your first bit of work, or was there like a notion to be like, yeah, Luke, you can just write however you want, whatever style you want? Because that's the thing with me, as far as like, not I don't just do this, like, this is my main thing, but I also blog on the side. And the good thing is I'm what you, I guess you call self-published, where there isn't a lot of, if I was working for a publication like Jacobin or Current Affairs or even like Dissent Magazine, these are publications that I could just think off the bat that you yourself might are obviously familiar, because you work for one of them and you've written for another. You have that, you do have that kind of, you know I wouldn't say strict, but also kind of like, you have to be careful how you write things, if you know what I'm saying. And also, like, you can just say it in your own style, basically. And so that's what I love about, having the independent freedom that I have to basically write and blog in my own words. So
Uh,
was there ever that kind of, I guess the question I'm trying to say is, was there ever that sort of an editorial interference, that did you ever have to like face that in your like early career, so to speak?
yeah, I mean, I suppose, dealing with editors and dealing with that process and going through it is just a part of publishing, and it very much varies depending on uh, who you're working with and the kinds of things you're writing. I mean, in my case, after I did student journalism, I did spend a number of years sort of blogging and even just there was a while where I was just using kind of my Facebook as a blog, and I would write sort of long posts on there. Um, and I mean, as you said, the great thing about that is that you don't have to, you don't have to worry about, there's no intermediary between your brain and the printed page or whatever.
Hmm.
And that can be very liberating, although it can be it's a useful exercise as well. If you're writing for a publication where there's more of a strict editorial process, that can actually, in my case anyway, I found that at times it can be frustrating, but at times it can also sort of help you rein in some of your maybe your bad habits or your worst instincts.
Hmm.
In my case, just an obsessive focus with certain topics. Sometimes it's useful to have an editor to say, hey, would you be interested in writing about this? And in many cases the answer is yes, and I just hadn't thought of it or something like that. So
Mhm.
it's editors are I guess a land of contrasts.
Yeah. I mean, that's the good thing about having, we do need people, like we do need folks in especially in print journalism, editors to kind of look over our work and proofread and catch things that might sound a little off center to make it right. I mean, that's how a good article kind of flows in the publication, especially for people who read the article in question and kind of are they kind of look for things in the publication that or in the article, and you kind of like, oh, that's interesting, that kind of thing. Um, so I guess the next question, I might have already, this might be related to what I asked in the beginning, but I guess how did you get how did you get started in the journalism world? And I guess you could say probably post college in a way, like when you're getting out there in the world, like 19, 20, maybe even 21. Um, and like, how did you begin working for Jacobin, for example? And like, how did you hear about them? Like, who was the person to be like, oh, you should go work for this publication? They're pretty decent.
Well, I knew about the magazine because I was reading it, and the first piece I wrote for it, which I just kind of pitched to them, was about the Scottish independence referendum. And I just pitched it to them, and they wanted it, so I wrote that, and it was what it was about. It was a little over 4 years until I actually started working there, and in the meantime, I was working at a social democratic think tank in Canada, and that was my day job, and then on the side, I was writing articles for various publications, including Jacobin, and I was blogging and kind of finding my voice in that way. And then just eventually I started working at Jacobin, and so now I do that full time, and I'm kind of I guess a full time member of the media, though I don't tend to
You don't consider
self-identify
it.
that way. Yeah, yeah.
Is it uh, is there, what's the positive, I guess, working in a place like Jacobin? And I say this because again, I do have a subscription, and I read it as much as I can. I read pretty much everything that you and Ben Burgess and uh, Bronco, I can't pronounce his last name, but you know who I'm talking about, Bronco Marketique and Megan Day and Mickey Utrick, like all you guys. I mean, I hate to sound like a fanboy right now, but uh, I read about what you guys have done and things that you write about, and also Alex Press about the unions and everything that restaurants like Chipotle here in America, how greedy corporatists they are and how they treat their workers. I mean, that was an eye opener for me. I mean, you guys have seriously have touched on subjects that even me as a young leftist person, I mean, I'm 30, but back, as I was going through my 20s, stuff that I would really kind of know about but turn away from, and then as I was getting along and learning and perusing more, and I still am, subjects like supporting unions and striking workers. I mean, you guys are on point with that stuff. You know what I mean?
Well, thanks, John. Yeah, I mean, it's a project that I'm very happy to be a part of. I think that I'm proud to say that we've, I think, been become a major sort of forum for discussion on the left, and that what you just said, I've heard from a lot of people. I mean, I think that certainly when I was first interested in politics as a teenager, things like Jacobin didn't really exist. There wasn't really an equivalent magazine, and there wasn't really an equivalent kind of culture of discussing left-wing ideas, both in kind of a longer view historical way, or applying them to kind of just everyday situations, to uh, cultural debates that were going on, political debates, and so I think I've said a version of this to a lot of people after, since 2020, because obviously, Bernie, his second campaign wasn't successful. And, there's understandably tremendous, disappointment, and I think disillusionment in the wake of all of that. It felt like, the kind of a great window of possibility that was kicked open in 2016 or 2015 had kind of closed again. Uh, but in spite of that, I do say to people, if you think that the present landscape is depressing or bad, you should see what, I wish I could show you what it was like when I was 14 or 15. And
Yeah.
the only magazines to read were like, I don't know, Adbusters, things like that. There was just not a very focused kind of left wing politics. It wasn't very organized. It wasn't very systematic. It was kind of all over the place ideologically in some ways.
Hmm.
A lot of it wasn't really programmatic or proactive. It was just about like, we need to stop cuts that are happening somewhere or something like that. Or we need to oppose a war, good causes, but not
Yeah.
amounting to a um, not amounting to a kind of way of seeing the world in which we really believed that it could be changed in any significant way or even kind of reformed. And I think that whatever disappointment and disillusionment might exist since 2020, uh,
Hmm.
I think things are qualitatively different now, in many ways for the better than they were, in the 2000s, or when I was first getting interested in politics.
Yeah, in the aughts, I think is what we also call it. I mean, I say 2000s as well, but there's always that term, like you say, like mid aughts, late aughts. But I mean, we had the nation, which is still going strong. Um, just also FYI, Poshkar is now or has been the president of that magazine. So uh, we had that back then, but even still, like even like how do I say it? Even though we had that, or we had a sort of left wing movement of publications and like AM radio. When you look back and say like Air America, which quickly folded within like 5 or 6 years of existing, like there wasn't really that sort of community that we see now in left spaces, whether it be stuff like this or podcast or publications like Jacobin that are now kind of like a broad source of information that we can consume. And at times, I mean, I won't name any names, but there are certain people that are in the space that I've sort of been like, oh, that's not. I need to step away from that. You know what I mean? But I've the good thing about me is that I've always done my research. I've looked at the history. I've looked at where the stances are, and if I believe that they're good or it's good, then I am then I become a fan or I subscribe to it. It's that kind of like research process. It's like doing my homework kind of thing. I mean, hey, we have to do it at some point. But whew, starting to get nervous, but you take a few deep breaths. But anyway, I guess I would move on to like the next question, like your predictions for, say, the future of not just left politics, but like the leftist media space going forward into like 2024. I mean, we just came off this midterm election in the United States, and also you guys in Canada had I think an election yourself, if I'm correct, in Ottawa. And is that about right?
Toronto, there was a local
Toronto.
election. Yeah, there was a election in Ontario in the province about 6 months ago. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
elections happening all over.
Yeah, it's just there's just been so much going on this year that it's just so difficult to kind of keep keep tabs on what's been going on. It's just it's like a brain buster sort of thing, if you know what I mean. Um, but yeah, so like I guess from a point of view as a well, I guess political person on the left, like what are your predictions for the future of the left media space going forward into 2024? Because like, I mean, you kind of think about it in 2016 and 2020, we had a candidate in at least the United States and Bernie Sanders that we could all rally against and be supportive of. Do you see that happening again in 2024? And I know that's not the first question. Like that's not really the first time that's ever been asked in left media space, considering how for lack of a better term, mediocre that Biden is doing at this point.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think a lot depends on, if we're talking about just the left media space in the US, I mean, we have to react to the world as it develops. And I think it's not really clear to me what the landscape in 2024 is going to look like. It's depressing to think that the most likely possibility is an election between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, but that is a strong, distinctly strong possibility. Having said that, Biden actually is fairly unpopular. The Democrats, this kind of recent, surprise, better than expected performance in the midterms was kind of notwithstanding Biden's relatively low approval rating and other things. So, I don't know. Biden, I think, wants to run. We'll see what happens. We may get a very entertaining primary on the right, the Republican primary, that is, albeit probably a scary one. But I mean, it's funny to think that we might even get a sort of replay of those 2016 debates where you have a bunch of sort of Jeb Bush clones on stage with Donald Trump, and then meanwhile a bunch of other people like possibly Ron DeSantis, all trying to sort of out Trump, and I suspect failing. I don't know if anyone can really out Trump Donald Trump. There's been a kind of a narrative over the past few weeks since the midterms that Donald Trump's time is up. He's kind of a spent commodity, and within the Republican Party, I have my doubts about that. I think if Donald Trump really wants to be the Republican nominee in 2024, he probably can be. I may eat my words, but that's my feeling. I mean, of course, what the left really needs electorally is another candidacy like the Sanders one. If not a literal third Bernie Sanders campaign, which is a possibility, I suppose. If Biden doesn't run, then something similar. I mean, I think the two Sanders campaigns, even though they were unsuccessful, ultimately did show that there's a lot to be gained, even when you lose, even in defeat. Just in terms of the number of people who are mobilized to get interested in the campaign, who get interested in the policies that a candidate like Bernie talks about. I think I certainly hope there is a left candidate of some kind for that reason. Although we'll have to see if Biden wants to run again. I don't think that there's going to be a Democratic primary at all. And if that's the case, then the 2024 election is just going to be a sort of repeat of 2020. Donald Trump probably versus Joe Biden, and probably another sort of referendum on do you want a normal country governed by the Democrats, or do you want do you want the people who did January 6th to return to power, which I guess January 6th hadn't literally happened when the 2020 election happened, but it was similarly a referendum on sort of do you want normalcy or do you want what Donald Trump is offering? And so that's a pretty depressing possibility. And I hope that 2024 surprises us and is a little more interesting than that.
Yeah, it's like the options are: do you want normalcy, in someone like Joe Biden, or do you want this extremist politics in the Trump presidency that he has espoused in his 4 years in office, and will likely should or if this I mean we don't know for sure if his second round of campaigning will succeed, but you know should it, he's gonna espouse more, probably even more extremist. I mean, there's not really another word to use. Extremist rhetoric that he espoused not only in the first presidential campaign, but also again during the 4 years of his presidency. And I guess also like you kind of look at the positive side of it. You look at the Sanders campaign, the Trump presidency, and then you have the 2018 midterms, where like a lot of progressive candidates, being primaried from the left against establishment Dems, specifically the Squad. I mean, that came out of the Sanders campaign the first time around, and you know, was hopeful that that could happen in this midterm. And as you said, like with the better than expected performance of the Democrats, at least in my view, we didn't really see that as we did in 2018, like more Sanders-esque progress. I mean, Fetterman, obviously, but outside of that, we really didn't see much of a more progressive wing of the Democratic Party coming out like AOC's campaign was, or Nina Turner's campaign was. Yeah, Fetterman, obviously, like I'm so happy that he won and challenged the quote unquote fake doctor, as I call him, Dr. Oz. But you know, it's again, we'll just have to kind of wait and see what happens. It's kind of like an open book.
Yeah, I mean,
Specifically in
I should say, I mean, I think that even though it wasn't, yeah, I mean, the AOC victory in 2018, happened outside of the context of a regular midterm, and so it understandably attracted a lot of attention, and because I don't know, because the main narrative out of the recent midterms earlier this month was just that Democrats had defied expectations.
mhm.
I don't think there was as much reporting on some of the left wing candidacies that did succeed. But there's an article that my colleague Bronco, who you mentioned earlier, wrote just after the midterms. Which he kind of went through a lot of these races, and I mean, believe it or not, I think that the Squad, or whatever you want to call it, is actually bigger than it's ever been. I mean, the left in Congress has actually gotten steadily stronger. It's still, obviously a small minority, and it's unable to, exert its, it's not a large enough block to exert the kind of influence that we needed to, obviously. But those victories have been real, and they're also happening not just in the House and Senate, but in a lot of local races as well, which obviously don't get as much attention. But there were some real bright spots on election night in terms of left candidacies succeeding. So this might be one thing to be optimistic about, even though the chances that we're going to get another big exciting mass movement candidacy like Bernie Sanders in 2024 feels a little distant right now, but there is other stuff going on that is good news, certainly.
Yeah, it's like we have to focus on that stuff to kind of build up to the candidate that we want, or the progressive candidate that we want. I mean, there's like maybe 3 candidates I can name here, but I probably won't, or I'll probably tell you off camera. But and well, I mean, if I tell you, then coming, forthcoming, in the how would you say it, the foreshadowing, if you will, of the 2024 election, you guys, folks at Jacobin, will be writing what I would call pretty decent articles about them in the future, and that's just kind of how I look forward to, because again, you've written some already pretty decent articles in the last few years, especially during the Trump era, which
well, thanks, John. Elections, if nothing else, are great for writing and great for content. I'm sure that'll be true for your show as well.
yeah, I mean, like I said, I've only been doing this show for 1 year, so, and I'm part-time at this point, so this and school I kind of have to balance it. So at this point, it's got to be part-time, and then hopefully once I finish, I can focus on this on a more full-time basis and hopefully get better and stream much as possible and get better and take it to new heights, I guess. Um, so I guess back to the book, getting back to the questions there, like how did this book, and I'm going to hold it up again just for people to see it. I mean, the dead center. How did this book come about? Like, because again, it's a really decent book. I mean, I'm in the middle of reading it, and it's really I would give it a strong probably 10 out of 10, but I'm biased, so take my word for it. How did the book come about?
Well, thanks, John. That's very kind of you to say. I mean, the book came about because I was sitting atop, I guess, about 3 or 4 years of accumulated writing, and I was approached by a publisher, who wanted me to write a book on liberalism. And at the time, I didn't really have the time to sit down and write, an original book. So I put forward the idea of maybe putting together an essay collection, and I found that once I actually sat down to think about what might be included, I realized that the essays, if they were curated properly and introduced properly, really did tell a story. And it wasn't just going to be a sort of random pastiche of my favorite of my own articles or something like that. And once I actually kind of organized it all together, I realized that it was I kind of had a collected body of work on, among other things, the current state of American liberalism, but also, the other things that are discussed in the book. So, yeah, that's how it came about. And then, much of the process of putting it together was just sort of going back through a lot of these things. There are some original articles in it that haven't appeared everywhere else, but it was also an opportunity to revisit, older things that I'd written and perhaps, neurotically correct some of the prose or, fix a period that had, should have, was a comma or, whatever it was. It's a very strange thing to go back to work, even if it's, work that's fairly recent. You always find that there are things that you would have done slightly differently. So much of putting it together was that sort of boring work, but also curating, what articles I thought, if combined together in what order would tell the story that the book tells. So that would be a sort of short history of how it came about.
Yeah, and the wonderful thing about doing that is like going back in your past work and just kind of like as you say, revisiting articles that you've written for different publications and different avenues, and you kind of just look over and think, man, this kind of resonates now as it did say 3 years ago. And it's just like, hey, this is definitely something that I can include, and pretty much most of everything that's in this book I've read online or have seen in bits and pieces, and it's as the Alex Shepard quote that I'm holding up it is hilarious. It is very hilarious, and yeah, it's very spot on, and hope it does well. I mean, I also hope this is like like kind of like a new thing for you, as far as like what's your next book going to be like. Like you could like prop up ideas for like your next set of writing in book form, so to speak.
Yes, well, I can't tell you what it is, but I will have another book coming out next fall that I co-wrote with some people, which I'm excited to be able to talk about that one. And I definitely do have plans to write some more books in the near future, but not for a little while because
Right.
it's been quite the year, and
Yeah.
writing is an odd process. Sometimes you need downtime. You need time to time not writing in order for the ideas and the words to come.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to like give me any hints as what your next book's gonna be like. You can just like, I'll just find out through Twitter and just basically hints here and there on different shows and whatnot. I mean, you have to forgive me. I am a big junkie for this kind of stuff, so it's like the more I read and the more I actually can get my hands on it and actually consume it, the more passionate I am, I guess you could say. But again, I hope that this is a sort of first step into doing something even bigger in book form, and I look forward to seeing it. So, um, there's also like, I'm sure you know who Matt McManus is. He's writing a book
Hmm.
for Zero Books about like Michael Brooks, rest in power. Like for I think it was I saw a prototype of what the book is supposed to be like, but it was basically his version of or his view of different, I should say, like left politics, and I think it's supposed to come out he put out there sometime 2023. So I'm looking forward to that for sure. And shouts out to Matt. Um, hopeful that I'm looking forward to that. So um, I guess the last question about this topic, and then we'll move on to the Michael and Us podcast, which you know, I guess I've tried to listen to it. I generally am a podcast person in general. Kind of explains me doing this kind of thing. Um, because like usually when I'm out walking or if I like walk to school in the morning, I usually have my phone on and I have my phone and have like the podcast app and I'm listening to a different podcasts just to just be entertained and informed and a version of the two, if you get what I'm saying. So I guess who are your influences politically that kind of led you down this path of the left?
Related to the podcast, or what exactly?
Oh, like in your political thinking, as far as like who influences your writing, so to speak. I should have
I
been
see.
more.
Okay. Well, I mean, there's lots of people. I mean, you mentioned Michael Brooks. I mean, I guess I think that he influenced a lot of people,
Oh, yeah,
just in terms of
definitely.
the remarkable kind of sense of humor and joy that he brought to things. So, um, even in that case, I mean, I knew Michael, so it wasn't the type of influence from reading someone's books, but just kind of from knowing them and obviously watching his wonderful YouTube channel. Um,
Hmm.
but I mean, there's lots of people who've influenced me. I suppose Thomas Frank is somebody who sort of before it was cool was sounding the alarm about the Democratic Party and the kind of neoliberal turn it had taken. I mean, a book that was very important for me when it came out was Naomi Klein's The Shock Doctrine. I think the kind of core insight of that book that what's called the free market actually kind of has to be imposed. It's not just a sort of naturally existing system. It's very powerful, particularly when I first read it. So I mean, those would be a few. I mean, I also am influenced, I suppose, by various figures here in Canada that are not very well known in the States, but figures on the Canadian socialist from the Canadian socialist tradition as well. Um, but political influences are an odd thing. I mean, because you're influenced by things that you read, but you're also influenced by direct experiences as well. Um, I was influenced by my outlook has been shaped also by knocking on doors and being very, very briefly being a political candidate and back in 2014 here in Canada.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and uh, and all of it adds up to inevitably we're the sum total of our experiences, and um, you know all of those things kind of in different ways, I think, um, influence the outlook that I have, and shape the outlook that I have today. But in terms of some of the writers specifically, those two I named would be two examples.
I mean, for me, and I know, I mean, I would say for me personally, um, I have read Thomas Frank in more recent months, but I will admit that I can't get enough Noam Chomsky. I mean, that's just.
Hmm.
I mean, I read Manufacturing. I'm currently reading Manufacturing Consent, just to kind of understand it more as an adult. And also, I should probably throw the late Howard Zinn in there. Like the first time I read People's History of the United States, I was just floored by how much I didn't really know about uh, not just American history, but just overall history in general. Has been really influential for me, for example. So, and
Hmm.
of course, I also watched when the Jacobin YouTube channel was still doing the weekend show with Anna and Nando and Kel Brooks, the interview that they had done with Noam
Hmm.
Chomsky, which was I can go back and rewatch that interview so many times and it's still good. I just
Hmm.
I have to admit, but yeah, so that's kind of like where I would lean. So I guess those are some pretty good influences. And I guess Naomi Klein, I'm, not reading it currently, but I do have her book about the Green New Deal. I think it's called, I'm looking at it right now, On Fire. The big red and orange book that you can find easily at a used bookstore. It's amazing what you can find when you don't have to go to a place of all places, Barnes and Noble. But I mean, because used bookstores are much cheaper. Let's just be real, you know. Anyway, so yeah, so the Michael and Us podcast that's been going, I think, strong since 20. Last I checked, 2016 was the first time we were.
2016, I think. Yeah.
Well, sounds about 5 or 6 years, and Michael and Us meaning obviously Michael Moore. I should also mention that he was somebody that kind of was also a big influence in my political thinking in my early life because I do have I think again looking I think I have 4 of his movies in my DVD collection right now. So um, because again, like for me, I'll just kind of throw this out there. I My first year at community college in 2017, like the tail end of the semester in the spring, my history teacher brought in Fahrenheit 9/11, and I
Hmm.
had heard of the movie for years, but never saw it until I watched. We didn't watch the whole movie, but we watched like a good first 30 minutes of it, and it was just amazing to see, like going back to like the early political of the 2000s of the Bush, like the 2000 election, and what we went through there in the states with the inauguration of George W. Bush, and then here we are, some 15 years later, going through like this inauguration with Trump and all the protests. It was like a weird like deja vu for me seeing that. I don't know if you probably have that same feeling, but it definitely was, for me at least. So the Michael and Us podcast, like how did that begin? Was that just something that was you just thought about for a while and thought I want to kind of put that influence of Michael Moore to use, or I guess yeah,
Well,
just kind of give a little overview.
it sort of began as almost a joke. I mean, I think it's sort of almost like just an ironic little fun uh, thing between me and my friend where we thought, maybe a few dozen people would listen to it. And the idea was basically, yeah, we'll revisit, the cinema of Michael Moore, and sort of perhaps to experience the very thing you just described, which is, a sort of a sense of deja vu. What is it like to watch Roger and Me in 2016 or whatever? Um,
Mhm.
and we were maybe a little hard on Michael sometimes. We were critical of some of the films. We were more positive about others. But when we went through Michael Moore's catalog, what we realized was there were actually a whole bunch of right wing movies reacting to Michael Moore because Michael Moore
Yeah,
was, the big sort of bogeyman for Republicans in the early 2000s. And there was this whole wave of these very sort of down market conservative films going after him. And in many cases, actually just copying his style, which is very funny. Michael Moore had such an influential style that even his critics were copying it. And
Yeah.
over time the show's evolved, and it hasn't had anything to do with Michael Moore for a very long time. It's kind of just a more general politics and culture kind of podcast. But you know, we watch movies, and we talk about what their politics are. Sometimes they're extremely goofy movies. They're kind of very corny liberal or conservative movies. Sometimes they're
Mhm.
centrist movies that seem like they have a lot on their mind politically, but don't actually have anything on their mind. And sometimes they're just good movies. I mean, sometimes we
Yeah.
have to give ourselves a break and watch an art film that we're actually excited to see. So that would be an overview of the podcast.
Because you can't just watch just political movies all the time when you do a podcast. You do have to branch out every now and then.
Absolutely, yeah, and you will drive yourself crazy if you just watch sort of corny, liberal and conservative movies, or just Aaron Sorkin or whatever it is.
Mm,
So
yeah.
you do have to branch out a little bit.
Yeah, and that's the good thing with me with you because I'm disabled. Like being autistic, I do tend to focus on one thing and be laser focused on it for like
Hmm.
a certain amount of time. And so the fact that you're able to branch out of that uh, kind of gives the podcast a little more meaning, so to speak, and it draws you to more trying to draws you to more viewer base in a way, so to speak, and
Hmm.
it also kind of gives more of an overview, as you say.
Hmm.
It's more of like not just about Michael Moore now. It's about these different kind of like art form films or just these political films that came out in say throwing a year out there 19 not even in the 90s but probably like in 2003 and could have a meaning some 20 plus years later.
Hmm.
Yeah, but still a good show. I mean, I hope it's continued uh, at least for the next few years as our political system is still going to go down the trajectory that it's been, and hopefully that it would be good use for someone like Michael Moore to make some good movies as Fahrenheit, the Fahrenheit movies. Obviously, you mentioned Roger and Me, Bowling for Columbine, which I when did I see it? I bought it. It's in my DVD collection, but I saw that more recently. So um, I guess so was that the first? So Roger and Me was the first Michael Moore film you saw, or was it something else?
Roger and Me, I think, would have been the first one that I saw. Yeah, and I think that's the one that maybe holds up the best. I mean, as a film about class in America, it's pretty good. It's a it's I that one I found still very powerful to watch again. Another one that I think is good is Sicko, which just kind of makes the
Yeah.
moral case for universal health care, and I think does so very persuasively.
Oh God, I need to find Sicko. I mean, that's an objective. I have like I make a pilgrimage to my local used bookstore and I go through the DVDs, like the documentary side, and I look to see what kind of movies are out there that I'm still trying to find. I'm still trying to find Sicko. I mean, I've also seen what was it? Capital. I think it's called Capitalism: A Love Story. I think that's on. I think it's on YouTube for free. I may have to rewatch
Hmm.
that. So we're at the hour, so I'm gonna have to wrap this up. So I had like three more questions, but I may have to kind of pick and choose. I guess I guess we could get back to like the whole like the Aaron Sorkin type of universe, if that's okay. I mean,
Sure.
I mean, we talk about it in the beginning. We kind of touched on it in the middle. I guess now it's cool to just wrap up the fact that you've already written several articles. I think you've written two articles at least. One, the current affairs article about why liberals are so like connected to the West Wing in this weird pseudo way, and then there's also an article in Jacobin where you do actually critique Aaron Sorkin himself and his view of left politics, whatever that is. I mean, I wouldn't even call it left politics. I'd call it like at least center moderate left politics, so to speak, and how it's just like bad for the country. I mean, I'm just going to be blunt. Um, but I guess I didn't really write it as a question. I just kind of phrased it as like, uh, really not like, yeah, basically that, like how like Aaron Sorkin's own worldview of left politics, and like why is it that people who are considered moderate, or not even like I would say Hollywood liberal, like why are they so entranced that when they look at a show like The West Wing, or they look at a Sorkin project in general, like that is like what society should be? Does that make sense? Like how like this is how the world should be. Like this whole like Jed Bartlett era of left politics. That's the way the world should be, when we know it's in fact the opposite. And again, bringing up, Rob Lowe's, like, Bernie Sanders is hectoring at me because, again, I make more money in taxes and blah, blah, blah. I should be able to pay more in taxes. It's like, again, you're a freaking neoliberal, not even neoliberal. You're an elitist Hollywood actor that gets paid more to hunt for Bigfoot, is the last thing I heard what his project was.
Right.
So, like, why, like, seriously, why are, like, Hollywood liberals, why are they so entranced by that?
Yeah, I mean, that is really the question, isn't it? I mean, it's one of the things that really strikes you about that show, if you if you kind of follow the fictional administration, is that they get to the end of 8 years, right? 2 presidential terms, and it's a show where the liberal imagination is really allowed to fantasize as much as it wants, and yet despite that, in the fantasy, there's no, I mean, they don't pass, very much major legislation at all. They don't, their big legislative victories involve things like, a secret backroom deal to cut Social Security and things like that. So, if there is something that's attractive to people about that show, it's not that it's not about, a particular agenda or anything like that the fictional administration's passing. I think what people do find attractive about it, or what some people find attractive about it, even idealistic, that's a word you hear used in relation to it sometimes, is that it, aesthetically anyway, presents, American political institutions. It presents them as, being kind of, staffed by intelligent people educated at Ivy League universities who, maybe flawed people, but are kind of heroically trying to do their best in a difficult world, in a country that is, kind of pathologically conservative, and are, idealistically trying to uphold American values, and are doing so by, in the process, talking really fast and saying, saying nerdy things about, recess appointments and, filibusters and whatever else. And so there is a politics to the West Wing, but it's very much more of a politics of process and, making institutions look a certain way, in a way that's attractive to liberals who fantasize about expertise and meritocracy and that kind of thing, and these institutions being kind of inherently noble, and so that's more of, I think, the vision of the West Wing, and it's one that certain people at least find very attractive. I would also add, it's the show itself, I think, has actually played a role in actively shaping the way that some people think about the world. I mean,
Oh, absolutely.
if you read any of the memoirs that have come out of people that worked in the Obama White House, I mean, a lot of them, they specifically talk about this show as a reference point. I mean, such that when they, first arrived in the Oval Office, the actual Oval Office, they were, they weren't thinking, oh, I work in the Oval Office now. They're thinking, oh, I'm on the set of my favorite show. That's the level of influence that, Aaron Sorkin, his his worldview has had, and he's if nothing else, a very influential figure. I think mostly not for good.
Yeah, same. I mean, that's the other thing about like the last season of that show. Like they made this whole parallel of like the Jimmy Smits character and the Obama, the first campaign of like, wow, this is really kind of real life parallel. And again, as someone who had actually had to watch that show in high school growing up, it's like it wasn't until probably I was graduating high school that I did watch it for leisure at one point. I kind of had that revelation of, yeah, this is weird. This is weirdly, this is weirdly accurate as far as like Hollywood, in real life. Hollywood kind of makes it real, you know. But again, I mean, the Aaron Sorkin universe, whatever you think is, I mean, I hold my hand up and I say it's not good for left politics. I mean, we can criticize him all he wants. I mean, he's not going to go away. That's for sure. I mean, he's going to keep writing and writing and making weird like shows and movies and whatnot uh, about real life events and those of us who are on the left who are progressive, whatever side of the progressive side we fall on, we're always going to be there to critique it and have our assessments. Because believe me, uh, I mean, again, that whole like, it's not like it just doesn't really hold up as something that should be real, and you know, and I think you've written about it fairly well in the last few years, so it is on point.
Well, thanks very much, John. Unfortunately, I should go in a sec. But even though it's very very nice to sit here and be complimented, it's very nice to hear such nice things about the book, and I'm so glad that you enjoyed it.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm halfway through it, so I'm liking what I'm seeing, and again, it's I try not to be so fanboy about people on the left that I've admired. I try to be a serious kind of podcast interview person,
Well, maybe you
but
can get through the second half of it, and maybe you'll hate it, and then you can
oh,
come back on again, and we can argue about
come back in a possible future
it.
episode and say, yeah, this part sucked.
Yeah.
No, I know I'm gonna enjoy what I read. So, Luke, it was fantastic to finally meet you in person, at least virtually. I am happy that you were able to make some time to do this. Best of luck on the book. Obviously, it's the Dead Center. Are you doing I should mention, a book tour of sorts at the moment, or is that in the works, or is it already happening? Yeah,
Nothing. Everything's just tentatively scheduled now, but I will be. I'll be tweeting about it once there's events to mention. I'm sure I will be loudly promoting them.
definitely. I mean, if you're able to come to Kansas City, Missouri, I will sure to get tickets and hopefully have you autograph, and I could keep it proudly in my progressive left book
Thank you, John.
collection. So I guess the last part would just is the plug. I mean, let the folks know where they can find you and your work.
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at Luke W Savage. You can find my articles at Jacobin. I have like a little tag there. If you go to one of my articles and just click on my name, you can see all the articles. I put everything on Twitter, but you can also find me at patreon.com/Michael and Us. That podcast is also on SoundCloud and Spotify and your friendly neighborhood podcast app. So you
Yeah,
should
it's
you
on
can
all
check
the
it out there.
platforms.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's on all the platforms. It's easy to find. All right, Luke. Yeah, thanks for stopping by. Again, I appreciate you making the time to do this, and best of luck on the book.
Thanks so much, John.
No problem. All right, that was Luke Savage from Jacobin. Again, the book is called Dead Center: Reflections on Liberalism and Democracy After the End of History. and it's actually a very engaging read. And I would assure to go out and find this book wherever you can. It's a really good book. So with that said, I'm going to wrap up the hour. I don't know when I'll be doing my next interview. Hopefully within the next month. I have a few guest options, potential guests who I'm going to ask to come on. I think I have one person prominently. I'm still waiting, but until then, I will see you hopefully very soon. Uh, Left is best. Rest in power, Michael Brooks, and I will see you very soon. Peace.